Here are the 6 systems that every real estate investor needs. You need the make ready process. So what is this? Property is vacant. You got to get ready for rent. So what are the steps to do this? First of all, you need an inspection. What's the inspection process? Having a checklist so that you can inspect the property. You're going to inspect things like the HVAC system, the water heater, the plumbing, all the different things. And you're going to make sure that you do this every single time that you're getting a property ready for rent. So that is system number 1. So you have the property vacant. You make it ready. Now it's time to list it for rent. So you need a process for leasing. What is the process? Where are you going to list the property? What happens when applicants inquire? Do you have templates that you could just copy and paste so that you don't have to come up with the message to respond every single time? That could look like, hey, thanks for your interest in my property. These are the requirements, A, B, C, and D. What happens when somebody applies? How are you looking at the requirements? You want to have standard requirements for every single tenant. So you can rate them. Okay, what is the credit history that you require? What is the income requirement? What about criminal? All these different things you want to have standardized so that every single time you do the same thing, because there are things like fair housing laws that are going to be an issue if you don't apply this consistently as you scale your portfolio. And the next thing is, once a person is approved, what's next? Now you need a lease agreement. How are you going to send those leases? Which software are you going to use? Are you going to be doing physical leases? I hope not. What are your rules in your lease? What are things that are important to you? And what are things that you need to comply with in accordance to your state law? So these are all the different things you want to take into account. You want to have that in that process documented. And then that's it. They sign a lease. Now it's the moving process. What's the moving process look like? We're going to have the moving inspection. Make sure you document everything. The state of the apartment when they moved in, so that if they damaged the unit, you can go back to them and be like, hey, these are my pictures. This is what you signed. You both agreed that the house looked this way. And now what happened? You need this. And a lot of people just wing it, move in the tenant, and then you're having trouble because tenant's saying this was like that when I moved in. And then you're like, no, it wasn't. And then you're fighting, but there's no proof, right? Okay, now that they moved in, you give them the keys. What's next? Rent collection. How are you going to collect rent, right? Hopefully, you're going to be using the software. That way, you can collect rent via ACH. You have a tenant portal. You have a tenant ledger so that you can see the history of payments, a system that automatically charges late fees and reminds the tenants when payments are due so that you don't have to think about that. Then the other process is, okay, if the tenant has a work order, you don't want them to be messaging you or calling you at midnight. So you want to make sure you have a work order process. Work orders get processed within 24 to 72 hours. If it's an emergency, what is an emergency? So this is another thing that I actually recommend is having a tenant guide when the tenant moves in, because it will establish your process. Point them to that guide and say, remember the tenant manual that you signed at move-in? That establishes what's a work order. What's your responsibility was my responsibility. Like tenants will sometimes call you for a light bulb. That's the responsibility, right? And so having that process to make sure that you screen work orders, to make sure that tenants are not messaging you and bothering you at times that you're not working or expecting a 5-minute response. So having a software that will process work orders and stuff like that, or through email, that way there's a standard process and you know, okay, this is what's going to happen. A lot of times we're winging it and then we're complaining because tenants are not respecting our boundaries. It's also important that you follow through with your boundaries, because if you tell a tenant that your hours are 9 to 5 and then you answer the phone or call them at 10 p.m. at night, then you're kind of setting a precedent for them to be calling you and bothering you at the same time. I try to make everything strictly written, avoid phone calls and situations where they say, you told me this. Well, where is the proof, right? So that is things that you want to make sure that you have taken care of. The maintenance process is actually one of the most important for me, because that's where tenants can get you and say like, you didn't do this. And then they stop paying rent. And then you got to go to court. And then you got to prove that you did do all the work. And if you don't have written documentation to prove that you did do the work, you could be in trouble. Then continuing through the process, we're going to be in the renewal process. Almost a year passes by. You're going to send the tenant a notice to say, hey, your renewal is coming up. Do you want to renew? Yes or no? Now, you also at this point want to have a process in place to evaluate whether this is a tenant you actually even want to renew. Because what if the tenant always paid late, they were bad, they were whatever. then you might want to just send them a non-renewal notice. So you want to have a template for the renewal notice in accordance to your state laws and a non-renewal notice. So those are the two main things when the renewal comes in. And then you also want to say, okay, what happens? You got to sign a new lease, all the things. If the tenant says, no, I'm going to move out. Okay, now what's the process to move out? We're going to need a move out inspection. If you end up taking money out of their deposit, in most states, you're required to send a claim on security deposit letter to make sure that you outline why you're taking money out of that security deposit. And then, or if you're going to be refunding, what's the process to refund that security deposit? Once you get to the move out, you're back to the beginning of the process and that starts it all over. So that is kind of the major phases of property management. And you're going to want to have a process set up for the stages. So if you have zero process right now, it's okay. I took forever to set up a process for my business, but once I did, life got so much better. I was able to delegate to, which when you get there, you're going to realize how great it is to just have everything documented, because I did try to outsource before I had to process and set up. It was chaos. I'm going to be doing a whole series on this specific topic because I am super passionate about setting some processes, and I want to show you guys kind of what I do, and maybe I'll set up some free as well. So make sure you subscribe to my channel for more tips. All right. See you guys later.